my veins. Blue and one eye, red, white, and blue in my brain. I'm Bulldog born. Bulldog, that's my breed. I was born to follow where the Bulldogs lead.
Welcome back, everybody, to Inside the Kennel podcast. I've got myself a 350 AFL gamer, Bulldogs legend, Charles Sutton medalist, Bulldogs captain. They've erected a statue in his honour, ladies and gentlemen. They even named a wing after him. It's the one and only, the great Douglas Hawkins. G'day, Douglas.
Good on you, Paul. Good on you, Matty. Good to see you, boys.
You too, mate.
Matty, welcome to you, mate. Who we got on? Who are we going to talk about today?
All right, they don't get much tougher than this. We've got 1980s captain and just all-round superstar player. Dougie's teammate, it's Rick Kennedy. Go, Rick.
You know where he sat, don't you? Right next to me, number 7, number 8.
Right.
Because I remember, Paul, Matty, a young Rick Kennedy coming down from Traralgon, I reckon. Matter of fact, he was a very good golfer. I got a feeling he might have been Traralgon Golf Club champion at 16 or something, as a 16-year-old in the A grade of golf. So he's a very good golfer. And what I do remember, he came as a forward. How's that?
Right.
Yeah, he came as a forward, and I've just got a feeling. What year do you reckon he come, Matty? What year did you say?
81.
81. Yeah, I've just got that feeling that it might have been Royce Hart or Bluey Hampshire turned him into a defender.
Right.
And then obviously under the coaching of Mick Moldhouse, that was where he played. He played at full back.
Right.
But he definitely come down as a goal kicking forward from Traralgon. There's no doubt about that. And you know the other thing about him, boys, he got the flick.
Oh,
He actually got sacked from the Bulldogs. Now you can ask him this when we get him on, and I'm pretty sure that he got delisted.
wow.
And he said now I don't know if it was Royce Hart or who it may have been, can I have another chance?
Wow.
And he did. And I'm not sure if you blokes are aware of that.
No, I haven't heard that.
Yeah, I reckon he got delisted or got told he wasn't going to make it. And he wanted another chance, and he turned it completely around, Rick Kennedy. But how's that one, eh? When he was a young bloke at the Dogs, I'm sure he got delisted. I'd
hate to be the person having to tell someone like Rick Kennedy you're delisted. I could imagine his eyes just burning a hole through the person saying it. So I'm glad they retracted that.
I think it was a phone call, Matty, Paul. I don't think it wasn't in person.
Dougie, you know what? That sounds like a really 80s thing. You know, those times when Tommy Elvin made his way down from Latrobe Valley. That was a very 80s thing. It's a bit of a shame that sort of stuff doesn't happen these days, Dougie.
Yeah, it was, Matty. It was, Paul. And then, you know, obviously when Mick Moldhouse arrived in 84, he loved Rick Kennedy. He loved him the way he played, the way he played in the back line. And he was just a very, very much respected fullback. And as we all know, not many forwards kick many goals or have much room to get away from Rick Kennedy, because he was just one of those blokes. And I can always recall, you know, probably more than anything, it was the 1985 semi-final against North Melbourne. Remember Steve McCann?
Oh, yeah.
For North Melbourne?
Yes.
Before the ball was bounced, Rick was into him. He was just totally into him. And Steve McCann's looking, going, what have I done here? It was just, and we just got smashed 2, Paul, Matty, by Hawthorn the week before. Yeah. So he wasn't in a good mood, Rick Kennedy. No. And I remember looking down from the wing and looked at him. He was just ferocious. Just ferocious he was that day.
Yeah. Well, he was notorious for it, wasn't he? Do you recall like some of his mega battles with, you know, the likes of Tony Lockett and some of those big boys? Because he just liked to get under their skin, didn't he? I mean, you wouldn't approach Tony Lockett unless you had something to back you up.
Yeah, no, correct, boys, correct. And you know, of course, the Gary Ablett Senior played on him as well. Played on the great Jason Dunstall. So he played on some very, very good forwards. And not many got away from him. Not many got away kicking a real big bag on him. I remember one day Plugger actually holding him down with one hand. Punched him about 10 times. I'll never forget it. I come running in, I thought, no, I might just watch this and see how Rick comes up out of this one. Tough man, Kennedy. See you go.
Brilliant.
Hey,
Dipper held me back. That
he
wasn't
must
Dipper.
have been-
Wasn't Dipper. Anyway, it might have been Jeff Cunningham held me back.
Oh, Jeff. He must have been fairly nimble. It sounds like playing on Gary Ablett Senior would have been a mismatch, but was he fairly nimble on his feet? Because Gary Ablett was what, 6'2" and pretty quick and agile, Dougie.
Yeah, he was. No, he was. He certainly was. No doubt about that, Paul. But Rick Kennedy probably played him for probably 3 or 4 years. Gary Ablett, I think, arrived in 84, 85. I think he might have won his only best and fairest at Geelong was in 84. He played as a winger, Gary Ablett. So then he obviously went forward. But Ricky Kennedy certainly played with him for over a 4 or 5 year period. Rick Kennedy was just a fantastic clubman, a terrific player, make no mistake about it. He had ability. And we found out he was a absolutely sensational leader. And correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was after the 85 final series, our captain Jimmy Edmond went to Sydney Swans. Yeah. I personally thought I was a bit of a chance to captain the club.
Right.
I'd had a very, very good final series in 85, and Mick decided to give it to Rick Kennedy. And you know what? A great decision.
Yeah, right.
Boys, a fantastic decision. He led from the front, getting behind Rick Kennedy, breaking through the banner. You weren't intimidated. You weren't worried about too many things because you had a captain who was going to lead from the front and show you how to go about it and play, good footy but tough footy as well. And he went on to become, I rated him and Jimmy Edmond probably my best 2 captains that I played under. Yep. Edmund was fantastic, very much like Rick Kennedy, but Rick Kennedy become an absolutely sensational captain after 85.
Yeah, well, he represented Victoria, didn't he, in his first year as captain in 86 in that epic, match.
He did too.
Yeah, it was a ripper. So, it obviously, because I guess sometimes when players become captains, the weight of that pressure can maybe impact on their performance, but it seemed it went the other way for Rick.
Yeah, he went to another level, Paul, Matty, Rick. He certainly went to another level in his footy, and that was the belief that he had, that Mick Malthouse had in him, and gave to him, and really pushed him along that way. And again, I'll say it, he was an absolutely fantastic leader, a fine leader, and all the boys respected him for one, and we all loved him. And tell me I'm right or wrong, you can ask him this question. I don't think I don't remember Rick having a beer. He wouldn't have had much. He wouldn't have socially. Right. He was pretty quiet and pretty well behaved. And when he crossed that white line, guess what?
Bam.
We're going to war, Paul. We're going, Matty. He was one of those players that crossed the white line. He just went to another level. But off the ground, he was pretty measured and pretty relaxed. But you knew you couldn't step outside or upset him too much.
Yeah, Dougie, what an amazing thing to come to a club. You're saying potentially was sacked, told to leave, begged to come back, and went from there to being a prominent captain of the footy club. That says a hell of a lot about his character, doesn't it?
100%, Paul. I mean, he was gone, and I'm sure I'm on the money on this. I'm pretty sure I'm on the money of this. I didn't need to look it up because I was actually playing there, so I'm pretty sure that he was told it was all over. And he said, "Give me another crack at it," and he went on to do what he did, Paul. So, Matty, it was a sensational effort by Ricky Kennedy. Had some very serious injuries towards, which probably cut his career a bit short. Matty, you might be able to tell me what age he was when he finished, 28, 29?
Well, he started...
Much older?
It was in 1991, wasn't it, that he finished? I'm fairly certain he was born in 1960, so that must have been 31, I think.
So he played in 89, played in 1991. Steve Wallace was captain of Footscray in 89.
Yeah,
and Mick Malthouse's last year. So Rick must have stepped aside as captain, but still played. I don't remember him playing a lot of footy in 1991 because 90 I was actually captain in 1990, and if Rick was still playing, I was a bit surprised on that, Matty.
Yeah, well, he played 12 games in 1989, 7 in 1990, and 11 in his last season in 91.
Did he play? He was still at the club, and Stevie Wallace was captain and I was captain. That's a bit strange. Yeah, that's a bit strange. But anyway, I'm pretty sure it was Terry Wheeler who come along after '89 because it must have. I don't know what happened in '88 with Rick Kennedy because '89. I'm pretty sure. Correct me if I'm wrong. If Steve Wallace wasn't captain, I'm pretty sure Stevie Wallace was captain in '89.
Correct. Yeah, that's right. So the reins were handed over. So we'll certainly ask him about that. How did that transition happen?
And how did he handle it?
How do you handle it? That's right.
And to stay and just be a player.
Yeah.
At 28, 29, not the club captain, which he did magnificently. He was a fantastic captain. So, yeah, that's a 91. Yeah, okay, 91.
There you
good
are.
effort.
Doctor, you remember him? There's a great photo of him and Mark Jackson walking together, sort of have been quite amicable. And Jackson just looked like he towered over him. Can you recall any incidences where they played against each other?
Well, Paul Jacko was a monster.
Yeah.
And he actually could. Don't worry about Mark Jackson. He could play. He could play. We all know he was that a bit of a villain, a bit of a character, but he was certainly a very good player. Terrific kick for goal. If you look at his career, he probably averaged 4 or 5 goals a game. Mark Jackson. He was a very good player, but he was way bigger than Rick. And I'm sure some of the dialogue would been Rick would have been obviously giving it back to him, but I'm sure Jacko would have been right into him and Rick would have been giving it straight back to him. I'd love to have listened and just had to listen to what they were saying to each other because it would have been pretty frightening, I reckon. There's no doubt about that. But see, he was good. He was happy to play on the big blokes too, the tall big bloke. He played on Paul Salmon as well when Salmon was flying playing at Essendon. He was 6'6", wasn't he?
6'9".
Pretty quick. Yeah. So he played on the big forwards.
Yeah,
and the strong, powerhouse forwards as well.
And what was his main wheelhouse, Doug? Was he quick? Was he a long kick? Was he a fly from behind and punch? Was he mark in front? How did he play his game?
Yeah, he was pretty flexible, Paul. Matty, he could back himself in to mark the footy. His kicking was pretty good out from fullback. His marking was pretty good one-on-one. Very rarely did he get beaten one-on-one too often. So that's a feather in your cap as a fullback as well against some of the great forwards. His pace later on just left him a little bit, particularly playing on blokes like Ablett and Dunstall. Lockett different. Don't get me wrong, Lockett over 5 metres was pretty quick. But playing on, as a young Knox, he put his head in there. Playing on blokes like Ablett and Dunstall over 5-10 metres are very, very fast. So later in the career, I think it started to catch him a little bit with that pace of those real good forwards.
Right. And just give us a little bit of a hint. You said earlier that you were sat right next to him, number 7 and number 8. What was he like pre-game? I imagine he would have been stalking around a little bit like a hyena.
Matty, fair dinkum, Paul, I'd have to walk away. I'd walk away from my locker. I could hear the lockers getting banged, and he was actually headbutting them. His headbutt locker, bang, bang. I said, Rick, and he started slapping me. I said, mate, I'm going to get it when I go out there. He said, I'm going to give it to you now, Dougie. I said, oh, Rick, please. I just made it a habit, particularly at home. I'd disappear before the game because he was a lunatic before the game. He'd slap you and grab you and shake you. I'm thinking, Rick, I'm going to get it out there. I'm playing on dip it at 8. Leave me alone, can you? He was a real ferocious competitor in the rooms. He'd walk around. He had that stare and the look, and it was just he was going to war. He was just going to war, and that was his way of working himself up before a game of footy. And he was frightening, boys. He was if you're a first gamer, you'd be scared to go near him. He was just loud and just, as I said, going to war. Yeah.
Mike, did it ever occur to you just want to change your jumper number for that occasion? Say, boys, get me away from number 8.
Paul, I just made an effort to get away, particularly going towards game time before Mick Moldhouse called us in or Terry Wheeler called us in or where Royce and Bluey, the late Bluey Hampshire. Mate, I got away. I got away. I just knew I was going to get away from it because he was a lunatic, and I loved him. I loved him as a great leader, a great mate of mine, very loyal. I think he went on to become a director at the club at one stage there is that right, with David Smorgan back in the 80s?
Right. Yeah, I think he was on the board. So, you know, he's
Well,
got
90s, sorry, 90s, Matty. Yeah, go on.
yeah, the business acumen is, you know, you can see that. But you know, as a fan, see him come out on the field, we just thought he was wild and crazy. But obviously he's two-dimensional, and he's got leadership and all these sort of, he's like a Swiss Army knife, I guess, of skills. So we can't wait to have a chat with him. And actually, I think he's knocking now. He's probably headbutting the door. We're
I'm
let
going.
him in.
I'm going, Matty. I'm going, Paul. I'm out of here. See you, boys.
Thanks, Dave.
Folks, our next guest is from working class Latrobe Valley, 11 seasons at the Kennel, captain from 86 to 88, a Vic rep, life member, chairman of selectors, a board member, a man that Tony Lockett once said, quote, has evil in his eyes. It's the one and only Rick Kennedy. Welcome, Rick, to the program Inside the Kennel.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Matty. Nice to be here. Nice to be here with you two guys.
Fantastic, Rick. Well, welcome aboard. We want to start by asking you, as we do for all players, can you tell us, especially for the millennials who are watching for the first time and didn't get to see you play, how would you describe yourself as a player? And are there any current or recent Bulldog players that you compare yourself to?
I'd probably quote the great Jack Dyer, just a good, ordinary player. So we had to, I was one of the players that had to work very hard and to be able to play at AFL level, and that's what we did. And we enjoyed it, and we had a lot of fun. Current day, I don't know about current day players that I could relate to. There's probably not too many that lack speed, lack skill, don't have much talent. They've probably all got that. So.
Rick, I don't look, and just to confirm, I don't think too many good ordinary players represent Victoria, by the way. Rick, tell us about your background. Where you were brought up, where we know you brought up in the Barnsdale or the Latrobe Valley area.
Yeah.
You know, what was your football pedigree? When did you start playing? Who had an impact on you? Who were your mentors? Who were the coaches that sort of took you to the next level before coming to the Bulldogs?
Oh, now you're stretching me, Paul. It was actually Traralgon I grew up in, so family was all in Traralgon mostly, and started playing in under 12s when I was 8. Anyway, I remember meeting him many years later, and he said, I remember your first game, Rick. It was out of Glengarry, and it was a windy day. It was going from one side to the other, and he said, I put you on in the last quarter, trying to protect you, and I put you on the dead wing. And as soon as you went out there, the ball went there and you got it and ran off with it, and away you went. So, and your career never looked back. So that was his summary. It was very kind of him too. But I had some great coaches as a kid, and I think they all influenced us one way or the other. I actually retired from football when I was 13, and gave up for a few years until I reached HSC, and I played golf. Played a lot of golf as a kid, and a couple of my mates, Neil Christie and Brian Stazanowski and Frank Robertson, and I'll forget some people, no doubt. I went down and watched them 3 weeks in a row and gave them some advice about running straight at the ball, I think, something like that, because they lost 3 weeks in a row, and they talked me into coming back, or not coming back, but playing again. And I started in round 4, and I think I started full forward and kicked 5, 7, and 11.
Wow.
In the first 3 games, and I was sort of back playing football. That's how I got back into the game, and the Bulldogs picked me up. We played finals in the thirds that year, and so the Bulldogs invited me to go down to the Footscray and try out, and that's what we did. So that was way back in 1978, many decades ago, and I suppose the rest is history. But
so those formative years where you develop, and as we have today, Rick, pathways are there, and you've got to really be on those pathways to get drafted. You're saying you didn't play during those years for what, 4 or 5 years until year when you're out 17, 18. Wow.
Yeah, I'd be gone now, wouldn't I?
Yeah.
I wouldn't even get a sniff.
Well, thank goodness your mates lured you out of the bunkers and back onto the field, Rick, because it must have been around 1980, I guess, that you wandered down to Footscray. Would that be right for the under-19s?
Yeah, 79 was my first year. Played a few games in the thirds and then the seconds, and got injured. Had a knee injury and had an operation, the first couple of years were a bit of a struggle from an injury point of view, and in fact, at the start of 1981, got called up on the Tuesday night after I got changed, and they'd said, "Oh, look, you wanted upstairs." I went upstairs and got sacked. So I wandered around Footscray for about an hour and a half because Calvin Temple had just done his knee in the night series, and I promised I'd go and see him in hospital that night. So I knew I couldn't go too early because he'd know I hadn't trained, and so I hung around, walking around Footscray for a while. Then eventually made my way over to see him in hospital, and I didn't tell him. And I don't know whether that was through embarrassment or I'd like to think it was because I didn't want him to worry about me, and it's a great story actually, because at about 6:45 the next morning, he called me up and he said, "Mate, got nothing to tell me?" I said, "No, I don't think so." And he said, "I heard you got the sack last night." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, why didn't you tell me?" And I said, "Well, you're in hospital, mate. You got enough to worry about. I'll sort it out." He said, "No, I'm coming out I'm out Friday morning. I'll come straight to your place and we'll put a game plan in place to get you playing somewhere else." The game plan was actually to go to Collingwood or to Carlton, and but we had a meeting with the match committee to get an open clearance, and Royce, in his wisdom, decided to give me another chance.
Wow. That's incredible. So a good deed of going and visiting at the hospital, turned out maybe just turn the corner, and you remain at the club, which is absolutely incredible to hear. How exciting must it have been at that time to be coming down, and you were a forward, we understand. You're setting 11 goals. To be thinking that you might be in a forward line with Calvin Temple and a Brownlow medalist, and Simon Beasley, who's just arrived from Swan Districts. What a time to sort of get a signature.
Yeah, well, there's I always remember Pinhead, Shane Lovelace, who you remember, that could beat the ball about 80 metres. Jeff Jennings was captain in those days. Teddy Whitten Jr., Snapper Power on the halfback flank, and a whole range of lunatics. So Terry Wheeler in the back pocket.
Yes.
So it was. Look, I assume it's the same today. I talked to my son-in-law and at different times, and all the new guys, young guys coming in, we all go in there starry-eyed and look forward to the challenge of becoming men, I suppose, and probably more so in those days, I think, because it was a fairly cutthroat, rough and tumble sort of an era.
You've talked about being a junior and being a quite a prolific forward. How was it that you were actually transformed into a backman and applied your craft in that area?
That's actually a really good question, Matty. I think it really came about because the reality is when you're looking for a break at AFL football, you really don't care where it comes from, and you really don't care where you play. And what happened, going back to the story from the start of 1981, so I was given the flick on the Tuesday night before the first game. I missed the first game, played the second game. We played Collingwood out at Victoria Park, and I was in the seconds. And the coach of the second was a guy by the name of Frank Good, ripper guy, Frank, and a very good coach too, ex-North Melbourne player. And I played on Wiedemann, and I had a pretty good day. Anyway, Royce got appendicitis the next week, and Frank promoted me to centre half back in the seniors. So I'd gone from ball lollies to chocolates in 2 weeks, and we played Melbourne at Footscray, and lost on the siren. Robbie Flower, Hawke had pulled his pants down all day. Robbie took a good mark of Specky with a minute to go in front of goal and kicked the winning goal, and we lost by a kick or under a kick. And I played on a guy by the name of Spud Dallard, and I remember the start of the game because they bounced the ball, and I just always wanted to be in front of my, so I just charged in. The ball just landed in my hands. I just slammed it on the boot. I don't, but I got 3 or 4 or 5 kicks in the first quarter, and I was going okay. And And quarter time, I remember, because Jock Edmund come over to me. He said, "Rick, you're going great, mate, but for Christ's sake, look up before you kick it. Just
Lower
take
the
a quick
eye,
look."
lower the eye.
Yeah, well,
And what happened was, we went okay that day, and Royce come back the following week, and he couldn't drop me. So that's how I broke in. It wasn't through Royce; it was actually through Frank Good. So there's probably a bit of a story here as I start to talk about this again. That I had a few lucky breaks. I had a bit of luck on my side. I had someone sitting on my shoulder, pushing a few things out of my way to enable me to have a crack. So, but I was grateful for Calvin Templeton and the role he played in my life, and Frank Good and the opportunity he gave me to play at AFL level, and then you come across characters like Hawke, and I often talk about Hawke. People often ask me about the greatest player I've ever seen, and I always say Doug Hawkins without hesitation, because I've seen him play week in, week out, and I tell you how good Hawke was. He made me look good, because I could kick the ball out, I could kick it along the ground, I could kick it to his right, to his left, over his head. It didn't matter where it go, Hawke could get it.
He's already told us that, Rick, but
has he?
He has.
Well, I support him.
But Rick, I've got to tell you, when I look back on those when I was doing some research on you, watching the bits of play that are out there from Channel 7, and you see Hawke, I think he almost appeared to be ahead of his time, the way that he handballed out of trouble so intuitively.
Yeah.
It's not remiss of what you see today. I just saw the Hawks and Geelong game. It's like he was phenomenal, wasn't he?
Yeah. But I often say to people, Paul and Matty, that if we had have made the grand final in '85, and if people go back and watch the final series of us playing, Hawke was on absolute fire. And I know he's considered the great of the game now, but if we made that grand final, he'd be legend status, without a doubt, because he was enormous under pressure. Grand final day would have suited him, and I think Sheeds, I know, because Sheeds has told me personally that he was pretty happy that we got beaten by Hawthorn by a couple of kicks in the preliminary final in '85. But Hawke he's a freak.
Yeah,
I remember watching him one day. He had 4 opposition blokes surrounding him, and he just wiggled his head a little bit and took a step left, right, and all of a sudden he was out, and it was like he just made him look silly.
Yeah, the Matrix.
Yeah, it was just unbelievable.
So after 27 games, from 81 to 82, there was only 3 wins, Rick.
Yeah.
There was a changing of the guard. So you had Mick Malthouse coming in 1983, Wayne Walsh, chairman of selectors. You had a sports psychologist, Rudy Webster, arriving.
Rudy, yeah.
How did that impact you and the club?
Well, look, Mick's the greatest coach I've ever played under, by the length of the Flemington Straight, and that's with no disrespect to some of the other coaches, but Mick in my view, is a terrific person. I have enormous respect for him. He's got enormous history both on the field as a player and as a coach, and he was the right guy for us, I think, at the time, to sort of bring us into tighten us up a bit and put a few boundaries in place and straighten us up, and also Wayne Walsh. They actually they played good cop game, bad cop. We weren't smart enough to work it out at the time, but that's what they did. It probably wasn't until most of us retired or got near the end of our careers we worked out what they'd done. But Walshy had a real football brain. He was enormous, and Mick had the ability to get alongside us and lead us down a path. And if we had a broken through in '85, we might have been talking in different ways over '85, '86, '87, but or 8 or later. But it didn't happen. But he was a great coach, Mick. Wayne was a terrific chairman of selectors. Not that we liked him at the time, Paul and Matty. In fact, most of us hated him, but he played his role and he did it sensationally. And Rudy, well, there's a couple of stories there, because only the lunatics went and seen Rudy. So there's people like myself, Peter Foster, Dougie Hawkins, Steve McPherson, Simon Beasley, all the Einsteins. We'd go there on a Friday night before the game and have a session with Rudy, and you can imagine what it was like. I'm just trying to think who else. Jimmy Edmond,
Nice.
like all the meatheads, and as I refer to myself, and we'd start a session of meditation, or not that I don't know whether he called it that in those days, but someone would always get the giggles, like Doug Hawkins, and then Super would start up, and rarely those two guys got kicked out. 10 or 15. So it's like being in the schoolroom, as kids.
Brilliant.
I saw just when I was doing some research on you, Rick, I saw a section of play where Jimmy Edmond gets the ball, he gets a free kick, and there's a Bulldogs player in front of him. He just pushes him over, just push him out of the way. Get out of my way. Just did they fire you up because Dougie said that you were the sort of guy that bashed your head with on your locker to get yourself fired up, and Dougie said he got the hell out of your way. Like, was that the sort of thing that you're encouraged to do? Find your inner self or your inner being?
Well, it's interesting that's his memory, Paul, because and maybe it was sort of a build up, but I used to I'd get to the ground very early in those days. I'd invariably watch maybe even a half of the seconds. I'd get there probably just before half time of the seconds and at least watch the third quarter. Then we'd go in to sort of start getting ready, and I'd go and my routine was basically I'd go and get changed. I'd have some music going like Bob Marley or somebody, and I'd go and lay down in the medical room and effectively I thought it was sort of going to sleep or half asleep. In today's world, we'd probably call it meditation. But I'd sort of go off and do my own thing, and we sort of all had our own little different routines, and then we'd come back in and have the coaches meeting and do the warm up, and that's probably when it started to build from those moments. So probably by the time we're ready to run out in the race, we're probably ready to go.
Well, certainly, Dougie's recollection was get out of your way pre-game. In fact, you say you were calm an hour or so out, but actually we interviewed Choco Royal last week. He said he used to ride share with you from Essendon, and he said it was just like a kamikaze swerving in and out of Buller Road, and he said you were keyed up from the start.
Geez, I tell you what, these blokes aren't bad, are they? I thought what happened on the trip stayed on the trip, but obviously not.
You've been mentioning about a half a dozen podcasts already, Rick. Don't worry about that.
Well, I think it's. I did have a memory of there was a guy by the name of Brendan O'Sullivan, along with Danny Corcoran, who were fitness guys there for a long while, and poor old Brendan, and he's a ripper bloke, Brendan and Danny, and used to do a lot of pre-season training with them because I was always in the sprint group because of my lack of pace, so used to do a lot of work with those guys, and I remember we used to have this exercise where we tackle each other before the game, not full on, but not far off it either. Anyway, Brendan O'Sullivan was doing some tackling with somebody, and whoever he's tackling with, I can't remember who it was, but they tackled Brendan like, my 8-year-old granddaughter could throw a heavier tackle than what he threw on Brendan. And anyway, I said that's not how you tackle. I took about 2 steps away from him and nailed him on the concrete floor out of the VFL. Really busted his shoulder, and maybe I just forgot about what happened the last 5 or 10 minutes before games. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. I reckon you're right.
Rick, while we're on that 85 season, tell us about it from go to woe. How was the feeling at the beginning of the season, and as the season progressed? Tell us your side of the stories, because I've heard it several times from Brian and Super. Tell us your version of it.
Well, it's interesting because as you said before, Matty and Paul, it really started in '84, or probably in '83 with Mick coming on board, and Mick built a scenario of us versus the rest of the world effectively, and we all, a lot of us bought into that, or all of us bought into that scenario, and he did that in many different ways. I can remember we used to play volleyball, the medicine ball, on concrete, and we'd be diving for the medicine ball not to lose a point. But he was part of that. He built that resilience and helped us grow mentally and physically. And so there was the build up through 84. And then we just got stronger, fitter. He pushed and pushed and pushed us, not to breaking limit, but close. But he kept encouraging us, and we're just all pushing towards one direction. And then we got a couple of wins early in 85, and the season just took a life of its own. All of a sudden we had this belief, and I can always remember Mick talking about, that it could happen in the first 5 minutes. It might take until the last 5 minutes, but at some stage that the top of the coffin's going to crack open. And when it does, you just got to get your foot in there, and then you got to flick the lid off and smash it. And we just had this belief that we could last longer than other sides, and we just could keep going and going and going and battering our way through. And it took a life of its own, really. And I'm sure if you talk to the Hawthorns and the Essendon players of that year as well, they talk similar things. And so we just had a belief amongst ourselves that it didn't matter what situation we're in, that we could work our way back into a game or take the game by the scruff of the neck and keep going. So it was an enormous year. I busted my leg in round 18. I had a big fish hook in the main bone that goes down my right leg, and so I missed 8 weeks. But there was no way I wasn't going to play finals.
Yeah, I think you came back just in time for that round 22 against the Saints.
I did. Played against the Saints. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
And I'm thankful to my teammates and to Mick and the match committee, because it could have been easy for them to say, listen, he's not right, because I wasn't 100%. I was nowhere near 100%. And they worked the game plan. Had Mickey McLean in the back pocket. I had different people kick the ball out to save my leg.
Yes.
All that sort of stuff. So unfortunately, we just didn't break through that glass ceiling on preliminary final day in 85, and which was probably the most disappointing day for all of us. Anyway, Brian Cordy and I went and played golf at Metropolitan on Saturday grand final morning.
Wow.
Which in hindsight, I reckon was one of the biggest mistakes we all made. I reckon we should have all been forced to go and watch the grand final.
Right.
Because I reckon you need to go. It's part of the process.
Face the music.
You've got to face the music. Yeah. Anyway, we went and played. We went and played at Metro. Had a ripper morning. Had fun, and we got in the car about 10 minutes before the game started, and we hopped in the car park at Metro. Well, before we hit the gates, Toby and I were throwing punches at each other just about in the car, saying we should have been there. We shouldn't be here. We should be at the MCG and playing. And so it was sort of a funny moment in hindsight, but it hurt. And some would say maybe it didn't hurt enough as a collective group that we didn't back it up in 86, and the wheels sort of fell off. Jock Edmund went to Sydney in 86, and things unfolded a little bit, and we had a few injuries at the start of 86, and away it went. So, but it was, we had a great year, and they're not easy to win grand finals and or get to grand final, and it's a great bunch of blokes that we get together. Mark Callett and Andrew Purser and Jimmy Sewell and Beezer. You see the old teammates, Mickey Egan, Podhead. There's just a whole range of people that when we get back together, that it's like we've never been apart. Michael Ford and Brian Cordy and Peter Foster and Choco Royal and Wally, and there's some great memories.
Is that from the solidarity of that season or that period for you, Rick? You're saying that season was so special, even though you fell short, there's still a there's still a kinship there between you blokes?
Yeah, I think a lot of those guys, or we actually went through that 3, 4, 5, 6 years beforehand, where there was a number of years where we didn't win many games, so we went through the real hard times, the real tough times, and the tough times where we get to round 5 or 6 and had won a game, and they bring in Teddy Senior to do a bit of a rah-rah session, and Teddy Senior. I mean, some of the speeches he gave were just, he was off the planet. He was fantastic. So I think it was built out of, generally friendships, strong friendships are built out of hard times or going through tough times together, and surviving them. And then if you can come through and have some good periods after it, we have a laugh about a lot of things these days. I was fortunate. I played against some of the greats in Dunstall and Lockett and Quinlan and BT and a whole range of players that could actually play the game. Even Jacko, people often bag Jacko, but you got a guy that can kick 3 or 4 goals at full forward for you week in, week out. That's not a bad full forward.
Yeah.
Often I'd play on Jason and he kicked 2 goals in the first 10 minutes, and you go, oh, here we go, it's on today. And Mick, he'd leave me there. He wouldn't move me. He'd let me fight, and probably because of that I fought. And Jason might have ended up with 3 or 4 goals for the day, or whatever happened over the day. And so I've got enormous respect for Mick. I've got enormous admiration for him. People often speak not nicely of him, or try to me, and I can't accept that. I can understand that they may see a persona of him that they believe that's who he is, but that's not who he is. If I often say to people that if we're at war and I was in the trench next to Mick Malthouse, I'd be wrapped, because I know one thing: when they blew the whistle, he beat me over the top. So that's who Mick Malthouse is, and I've got enormous respect for him.
Jason Dunstall, just a quick segue. The famous footbridge incident, Rick, where you accidentally, it appeared, to step on his back. Tell us about that little incident, because I thought, I wasn't a big fan of Jason back in the day, so I was delighted when that occurred. And I had great enjoyment just, revisiting that experience in my research. His acting skills were at their peak. I thought he was a Premier League player there. But talk us through that. What were you thinking in that time? You were known as a pretty hard man. You had a few, you went to visit the tribunal a few times. Tell us about your general football persona. Once you cross that white line, how would you describe yourself from the man out there and outside the white line?
Generally, I think I was a Jekyll and Hyde. Off the field, I was probably a different persona to on the field. I think part of that was the era that we played in.
Yep.
That you needed to go hard, and that was just what had to be done. So it was either you or him. So I'd rather be him. But the Jason Dunstall is quite funny. My ex-wife now, wife then, and she just had our first son on the Thursday before the first final. So that was the preliminary final, and she didn't go to the game, and I didn't tell her about the incident. And the next morning we went off the Sunday morning get together, and on the way home, when I got home, she said she had the paper laid out with the 3 or 4 shots of the before on top and after. She said, "You got anything to tell me?" I said, "No, not really." And I remember, I can't remember who the umpire was at the time, whether it was Rowan Sawyers or someone like that.
Yeah.
And I said to him, "Mate, I slipped." He said, "Rick." I said, "Mate, I did, because if I didn't slip, I would have kicked his flaming head off. And it wasn't flaming was the word, but his flaming head, I would have kicked his flaming head off. I'm telling you, I slipped. And anyway, Jason took the kick and kicked the ball across the face. I think it actually went out of bounds.
Yeah, yeah.
And I ran back past the umpire. So I told you, that's karma. God upstairs, he's telling you, you made a mistake. And I did slip anyway. So that's my story. I'm sticking with it that I slipped because if I hadn't, I would have kicked his head off. But you know, it's a pretty scary place when you're standing next to Dunstall or Lockett in particular, or even Bernie Quinlan. I mean, Bernie had to get Bernie out on the wing before he couldn't kick a goal. So you know, there's a big space there. So but you know, that was part of the challenge of those days. I look forward to those challenges. People often ask whether I'd slept on Friday nights. I had no problem sleeping because I'd be thinking about jumping on people's backs, but no. Warwick Kappa. Oh, there's one. Warwick Kappa.
How was it playing on Warwick? Did you guys have much banter?
I wasn't a great talker on the ground, Matt. I always believe people that spoke you, you've got them. So I really wasn't one to talk.
Right.
I think Plugger and I would have said, apart from good luck and well played, probably would have said another half a dozen words to each other.
Right.
I remember one really cold day, he said, "Geez, it's bloody cold, Rick." And all I would have said was, "Yep, it is." Warwick, it's a classic because I bumped into him a number of times since we all retired, and he said, "I used to love playing on you, Rick." I said, "Oh, did you?" He said, "Oh, yeah, you know, I said, "Mate, you never kicked the bag on me. You never took any of those speckies on me, mate. You keep yourself. You go back and see if you can find one. You never got one on me, champ." And I used to have a dream. This is my dream when I was playing against Warwick Kappa. I probably shouldn't tell you this, but I will. It's a bit of fun. I used to dream about tackling him by the hair. So you grab his hair and swing him around and slam him on the ground, and you'd be left with a chunk of hair in your hand. That was my dream.
I think we have to organise a seniors rematch, and we can actually live because that sounds absolutely fantastic. Now, I know you're sticking to your story about Jason, but surely you can't stick to your story. This is according to Doug, the semi-final against North Melbourne with Steve McCann before the siren even started. Tell us what happened. You marched over to him. We've got to find some footage of this. What on earth were you thinking?
I had an old mate of mine and a guy by the name of Colin Seary who played at the Bulldog, played reserves and played a few senior games and came from North Melbourne to the Bulldogs, and then he was a fitness instructor and he was a fitness instructor and runner for North Melbourne. And we obviously had some banter and we were lined up for the national anthem. So you got the big line and we're lined up and they played the national anthem and we've gone to run off. And as I've gone to run off, I've looked up at Cole. Cole's looked at me and he spat on the ground. So he's sort of gone, you know, and spat on the ground at me, sort of thing, right? I've gone, "Oh, stuff that." Okay, so I thought, that's okay. We're just having a bit of fun. No worries. So I run out and obviously I was playing on Steve McCann and I said, "Steve, tell Siri this is for him." And I've just gone bang, punched him fair in the jaw. And apparently quarter time, Steve's running a quarter time straight to Cole and going, "Cole, what have you done to Kennedy?" And Cole's going, "What do you mean?" He said, "He's walked up and he said, 'This is for Cole,' and bashed me fair in the face." and Cole just started laughing. Anyway, it was a bit of a thing between her and I, but that's the true story. You know, it was only bluff. That was the game in those days, wasn't it? You only had to bluff people. I wasn't that brave. I wasn't that strong. It was just you had people's bluff.
Well, I think you bluffed the entire crowd and AFL public, Rick, because we were scared of you and we were on the other side of the fence and we barracked for you. So you did well. Now, Rick, we want to move to post 1985, but this was a time, and you touched on it briefly, that Jock Edmund, our captain, was lured by Dr. Jeffrey Edelston at the time, wasn't it? And the Swans had a lot of cash, so they stole our captain, and we were left rudderless in some ways. We had no skipper, so someone had to put their hand up and say, "I'll be captain." Now I understand on the flight in the post-season in '85 on the Qantas flight, someone did put their hand up and say, "I'll be captain." Ron Groenewegen. This is true. Now this discussion's for another time. I understand, but if we could just pause for a moment on that flight, on a scale of 1 to 10, if 1 is very chilled and 10 is a little bit excited, give us 3 names of players who are at the pointy end, the very excitable end on that flight, that we can probe them on a later podcast. Who are 3 people who we need to interrogate?
Well, you'd probably have to first talk to one of the biggest, tallest guys in AFL football's history, and that'd be Tony Bahagia. Who was 3'2", and we used to joke that, and he's a most beautiful person, Budgie, and his wife Michelle, and we used to, it might have been just me, but I used to ask him whether they had steps up to the kitchen sink and the toilet and the bed to get into bed. I'd certainly Budgie. You'd have to talk with Budgie. In fact, a non-play that you probably should speak to is a guy by the name of Gary O'Sullivan. Wagon, Robbie Groenewegen, certainly one that would be interesting to have a chat to, Captain Groenewegen. It's an interesting. I suppose everything's funny when you're in on the joke, aren't you? It's sort of, and you get someone on that finds the microphone and gives it a bit of a tap and says, "Excuse me, passengers, but this is your captain speaking. I don't wish to alarm you, but we are going down." I mean, it's funny to the people that know what's going on.
Yes.
But I reckon to everybody else, you'd actually feel like the plane was dropping. I'm sure that couldn't happen today, but
we'd end up in Guantanamo Bay if it happened today, I'd say.
Yeah, there was a fair lead up to, and there's probably a whole host of stories up to that point, and there's a few more probably after that point that, once you're on a trip, they stay on the trip.
Yes, indeed. Well, you've given us 3 names, Rick, so don't worry about that. We will, this is to be continued, viewers.
We'll exploit that information, Rick. Thank you. Now, Rick, leadership agreed with you because you played for Victoria that year in '86. Tell us what it was like representing the Big V. We've had a few guests who have done that, and their reflections are really powerful. What was your experience of putting that jumper on and knowing that you're in the best 22 players in the state of Victoria, probably the premier state for football?
Yeah, it's quite a humbling experience, to be frank, Paul and Maddie. I think because I don't think, and I certainly didn't think that I was of that ilk, to be frank. And you roll up to a training session. I actually made the squad in '85, but then I busted my leg like a week after it got announced, and unfortunately missed out in '85. But and you roll up to a training session, and I'll never forget it. We're at the MCG, and I'm walking down the race to go out the train, and I happened to be walking behind Terry Danaher, TD, and TD turns around and he says, "G'day, Rick. Good on you, son. Welcome to the side. We're going to have some fun, champ. Now let's get out there and have a crack." And just that, just things like little things like that from someone like Terry Danaher, who is a legend and was a legend at the time, to turn around and take that 1 minute or 30 seconds, probably wasn't even that, 15 seconds to say, "Well done, son. Great to see you. Great to have you on board. Looking forward to playing with you." And that was the feeling with everyone that was there. We're all obviously proud as punch to be there, And some of us were quite humbled by the experience that we're in that arena with those guys. I spent a lot of time with Dennis Banks and
Darren
Malane.
Yeah.
And Daz. I've got two of the greatest opposition blokes I've ever met, and I haven't met a lot, but they are just ripper blokes. And Darren and Banksy got a lot of time from them, and we had a fun time away on state footy over in Perth, and it was just good to be part of, you know. Unfortunately, my game wasn't that great. I played on Brian Peake and he pulled my pants down in about 5 minutes. To be frank, I probably shouldn't have played. I had an adductor, I had a tear in my groin, but I missed the year before for a broken leg, and I wasn't going to miss 2 years in a row. But it doesn't matter. I've got the big V that sits in my wardrobe, and it brings back some great memories of being involved with a whole host of unbelievable people. Choco Royal, Choco and I roomed together.
Yep.
And he played for Victoria a number of times. So I was the recruit, and Choco was the old fella, and it was great.
Yeah, awesome. And you touched on being a leader that year. So you're appointed captain. You had an incredible season to play for Victoria. The season itself did not go quite to plan in '86.
No.
For a season that promised so much, having reached 10 points from a grand final the year before, we had some hiccups that year. What happened, Rick? And can you tell us how that unfolded?
Well, I think it really started, Matty, with what you just mentioned before. We lost our captain. That's a big hit. You've come out of a wonderful year, and apart from getting to the final dance floor, but you've come out of a year which you've built an enormous platform that you can really build from. And we lost our leader, and things probably started to go a little bit awry with some of the teammates. Brad Hardy, and we had a few injuries early, and we just didn't get into sync. And it's amazing when you think that it can happen pretty quickly, can't it? There's only 5 or 6 months between the end and the start.
Yeah.
And you can be effectively a different side, and I think also that you've got to. We used to always talk about, from one year to the next, you've got to lift another 10 or 15% to be able to compete the following year. Well, we needed to lift another 10 or 15% to be able to get back to the same position, and we didn't. It's really as simple as that. For a whole host of reasons, and not for the want of trying, not for the want of effort, I don't think. It just didn't come back together. As I mentioned before, in hindsight, and I'm a great believer in this, particularly in our case in that year where we missed out by really about 10 minutes in the last quarter, I think we all should have gone and watched the grand final the following week, and gone through the real heart of watching two sides which we believed we had the ability to match. Whether we had the ability to beat them on grand final days, and you'll never know it now. Certainly we believe we had the ability to match, and we believe we had the ability to beat them. But obviously we didn't. When it come to the crunch, we didn't quite have it. So we should have. I personally believe that we should have gone through the pain of it. So it's pretty disappointing in '86 and subsequent years, and we sort of just started to fray a bit, and then things get a bit unwieldy, and then it gets hard to sort of put everything back on track. You've really got to come through with probably nearly a clean sweep of people in a sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, 1987. We were back on the Big Dipper, and up we were climbing again. We seem to have, the likes of Tony McGuinness. Yeah, absolutely. And we started to get back on track. We had some fantastic players in the middle of the ground who were just tearing it apart. But 87 was a year of almosts, was it not?
Yes. Yeah.
And it culminated with that incredible game in round 22 against Melbourne at the Western Oval that we had to win in order to make the 5. Can you remember that year and particularly that ending?
Yeah, look, it's interesting when you sort of reflect back, and I often have and with some of my teammates, and there was sort of the Western Bulldogs foot strain out. We got that glass ceiling. We sort of get to a point, and then we, for whatever reason, we pull back. So there's something, I don't know what it is. It's in our psyche that. As Mick would say, you get your foot inside the coffin and then you kick the lid off. You got to go for the throat, and there's something in our psyche that stops us from going for the throat as a collective group.
Rick, in '89, you've handed over the reins to Steve Wallace to be the skipper of the club. It was a disastrous year on and off the field. You've got a background in finance. Were you aware of the sort of dire straits the club was in at that point?
No. Well, as a player, we as players, you really probably have no real idea about what's happening behind the scenes. We're just focused on playing football. It wasn't until and Nick Collum actually called me. They had a meeting at AFL House or VFL House in those days, and I was working as an engineer with Telecom. I was just up in Collins Street. Nick rang me and said, "Mate, I need you to come to VFL House now." I said, "There's no tribunal on, is there?" No. And I said, "Okay." So I got excused myself from my boss, and my boss allowed me to go, and I walked over to AFL House, VFL House, and got upstairs, and Nick come out and he handed me a document about so thick. He said, "Have a read of that." Oh, okay. So I start reading it, and it's about a merger. I said over our dead body, and he's gone, "Mate, well, we're in trouble, and financially we're in trouble. The board as a collective, we're financially responsible for the club. We're trading in deficit, and we've really got no choice." And I've gone, "Okay, well, I respect that, and I feel, you guys are going to make whatever decision you think you've got to make, and I respect it either way. And I appreciate you taking me into your confidence. So can I make a phone call?" And he said, "Mate, you can absolutely." So I rang Peter Gordon, and then Peter got into action, and history's history. I remember driving over on the morning of the rally, and on match day at the Western Oval, you come around behind High Point there, and the start of Gordon Street, it was chockers. That was match day at Western Oval. It was all, and I come around behind High Point, and I don't know why it happens, but I've actually got it happening right now. There's a bit of a tingle going up my spine, and you come around behind High Point, and I get that tingle going up my spine. Well, I remember the day of the rally, and we come around behind High Point, and the cars, it was just cars everywhere, and there was the tingle come up my spine. I thought, we're on today. This is actually going to happen, and that was just from a player's perspective, we just got into action to get all the players, or as many players that were around, to the ground on that day. All the supporters come along, supporters from not only the Western Bulldogs come along, and it was just a great movement of people to be involved with, and to be frank, the players being out as the focus or the centre of attention, or whatever you want to put it. We weren't. All the supporters were the centre of attention, and we're just happy to be part of it, and respectful of all the people and what they did over the ensuing weeks. So that passion that comes out in football certainly come out in that period, it was huge to be part of. Will's come back from on holidays at the drop of a hat.
Really interestingly, Terry Wheeler's appointment in 1990 was a real turning point, wasn't it? How did that shape our new course and our new pathway, would you say?
Wheels is unbelievable. I mean, if you ever watched him play,
Oh, yeah.
who he was as a player
Yeah.
is actually who he is as a person. You know, he just wants to win, and he's as a teammate. You couldn't want for a better teammate. He was always lifting you up and encouraging you, and that's who he was as a coach. I think he was before his time as a coach. I think he was probably too smart for most of us. I remember one great speech he gave. He drew this circle up on the board, and he said that all the players in the room, and he said, "Now, boys, this circle represents the brain in your head." And we've gone, okay. And he's cut out a little slice that represented 5%. He said that 5% of your brain represents how much you know you know. And then he drew another 5%. And he said that other 5%, he said that 5% represents how much you know you don't know it. We've gone, okay, how much we know, how much we know, we don't know, yep. And then he's gone, this 90%, he says that represents how much you don't even know you don't know. and we've all looked at each other like, oh, what is he on? And it's so true, you know, but he was a wonderful coach, Wheels, and I mean, he had a very successful time at Williamstown, and I think he was successful at the Bulldogs. And he and I didn't necessarily say eye to eye on things, but that's okay. You don't have to. You just have to work together. And
when we talk about when players like Brian Royal, Choco talk about Terry Wheeler, they often say he either elevated their game because they talk about the fact he was ahead of his time with strategy, and it wasn't just about getting the ball. You had to be in a certain place to get the ball, and you had to play a team role. How did your football go under his tutorage?
Well, I was at the end of my career. You know, I was 30, 31 when I played under Wheels. I was probably suffering a little bit from injuries. Certainly my final year at 91, I was probably suffering from passion and enthusiasm. I knew by about round 5 or 6 that I was done. I was going to retire at the end of the year. I used to wake up, getting out of bed on Saturday morning going, do I have to go and play a game of football? Yes, I do. So it's probably be unfair to say under Wheels that I battled through, because that wasn't about him. That was about me. You know, maybe at the time I made it about him. I don't know, but you'd have to ask him that. But that was certainly about me. I've got enormous admiration for Wheels. I think he was a terrific coach. You know, Mick, I had most of the best part of my career was under Mick Malthouse. So it's unfair to sort of compare Mick and Wheels because they were different stages of our careers. And I don't want to say the worst coach was, because that'd be disrespectful to one of the greatest players of all time. So, and
Rick, I think it's whoever you talk to, because I know we had a great interview with Alistair Ford, and Royce was an enormous supporter of him.
Yes,
to the club, tutored him individually with. I think it was a great story about him and Pete McCormick taking him out, this 17-year-old. So you're right. It's whoever. It's a particular personal thing to some degree, isn't it?
Well, and all coaches have that, don't they, Paul? Maybe that, you know, they tend to relate more. It's like, you know, that's pretty normal. I think Royce, if I was, he probably couldn't work out how the hard worker had to work to become successful. He was just used to natural talent. And it'd be fair to say that Alistair had a fair bit of natural talent, and in fact, he's probably similar to Royce in the way that he played. I mean, he had an enormous relationship with Calvin Templeton. You know, if you spoke with Calvin would probably speak totally different about Royce than me. So it's probably, I'm looking at it from probably through my glasses, but that also could be taken because he sacked me, remember? So, that's right. But then I played under him as well, so not that I ever felt that safe playing under him. But there's a good edge to that also. You know, you don't really understand it when you're playing, but you know, there's a fine line between having enough edge to feel uncomfortable and enough edge to feel comfortable that you can actually perform.
Yes, yeah.
So I'm probably being a little harsh towards Royce, but I think his difficulty was with the average player to help get them better.
Now, as all players, the inevitable ending has to come at some point, Rick. And your final year, how was it that you decided to hang up the boots finally? Because that must have been an incredibly difficult decision. That, you know, the Kennel had been your home for so long. How was that decision come about?
I've got to be honest, Matty. It was a pretty easy decision for me. I knew I was finished. I could probably have got fit again and healthy and all that, but mentally I was done. In fact, most people say I was mentally done a long time before that, but mentally I'd had enough. I wasn't enjoying playing anymore. I wasn't getting up for the challenge anymore, and it was becoming a real drag to play and train, and I don't think that's it's not good for the club. It's not good for my teammates. And that's the most important thing. If you're going to be an anchor, or you're going to pull things back, well then you've got to get out of the road. So to be frank, I'd made up my mind. I was probably pretty early that it was probably going to be the last year. And I certainly knew many weeks before the game finished, and I didn't tell anyone. We played our last game in Brisbane. I remember trying to get a few into Roger Merritt, who I was great friends with, and because it really didn't worry me if I got suspended. And we flew home, and I didn't tell anyone it was the last game. I got up the next morning and drove to Peter Gordon's place and had a coffee with him. And said, "Mate, I'm done." He said, "What do you mean you're done?" I said, "Mate, I'm done." He said, "No, you're not." I said, "Yes, I am. I'm done, please."
Rick, over those 11 seasons, talk about some of your best teammates for whatever reasons, whether they're geniuses or great supporters of yours. Give us a few names that really stand out for you, you know, post-career.
I'm a huge fan of Simon Beasley. This is actually going to go out. People are going to hear this, aren't they?
Yeah. You're committed now, Rick.
Right. Anyway,
Matty does do the editing, so you've got to talk to him.
Okay.
That stays in.
Beezer is one of those blokes that give you the shirt off his back like Hawk. If all they can give you is their shirt, they'll give it to you. And Beezer, I know when I went through my divorce, the first bloke that rang me, and there were many blokes that didn't, and there were many close mates, and who I considered my best mates, nothing. Beezer, tits. How you going? Oh, going all right, mate? Why? I hear that, the conversation unfolded. He said, "Listen, we're having some friends over Friday night for dinner. You coming?" "Oh, Beezer, no. I'll see you at 7 o'clock. Bang."
Brilliant.
So I don't forget those things. So that's who, and I've seen him do a whole host of things. I could talk for another hour about Beezer. Hawk's the same, in different ways. Who you see today, I mean, he's probably, I reckon he's one of the best people I've seen work with kids. How the Western Bulldogs Football Club, Footscray Football Club, has never got him involved from a marketing point of view, from within the inner sanctum point of view, has got me absolutely flabbergasted. Even today, he's one of those players who is not only brilliant on the ground, he can actually still see it unfolding today. So but as a bloke, he's just a ripper bloke. Mickey Egan, I love Mick. He was my little back pocket player. And unfortunately, we just haven't seen a lot of each other over the time. Murray Rance, when Slug come over from Western Australia, he and his wife and my ex-wife and I were great mates, along with the Royals, Choco and Marie and Sue and Wally, the the four of us were basically inseparable. Not as much as Choco and Wally. I mean, they basically slept together, those two blokes. But the four of us were a gang, you know, and we had a lot of fun. But you know, I could sort of go through, you know, the guys from WA, Andrew Purser and Jimmy Sewell and Tony Bahaja. I'm sure we could get back tomorrow morning and it'd be like we'd never been apart. And that's, you know, Mickey Ford, you know, the only bloke that come in and rescue me from when Plugger Lockwood was knocking me out, you know. Everybody else was running the other way, you know. No, not Mickey Ford, Mickey. You know, Mark Kellett, Peter Foster, Brian Cordy, you know, and Raccoon Williams. I mean, there's so many great people that you get to meet playing alongside of them and play with. Jock Edmund, you know, enormous admiration for Jock. And then, you know, early days, you know, I talked about blokes like Terry Wheeler and Napa Power and Ian Morrison and Teddy Whitten Jr. and Bruce Reed and John Reed and you know, we could go if we got a list out. You go, oh yeah, oh he's a ripper bloke. Oh mate, there's not too many people you go through and say, oh, don't know about him. You go through all of them. You go, we had fun.
Yeah, well, you've named about 1,000 Bulldog players there. There's only been 1,040 in our history, so you know that's great.
I'm sure I missed a couple, Matty, and I'll get on here and I'll go. Oh, I can't believe I've not mentioned him, but Calvin Templeton, Ronnie Simmons, Robbie Gronewegian. You know, we're great mates early days before Wagon left and went over to Tassie. So you know, there's just so many people. Shane O'Sullivan. You know, off the field as well. It's if you go back through, you sort of feel guilty not mentioning people. Bluey Hampshire. Yeah. Here's a story. I remember I used to suffer from boils. I remember I got this boil under my eye, and my eye was closed over. So I went to training, and the doc said, "Listen, you can't train." I said, "Well, I'll go and see Royce." And Royce said, "No, you'll be right." So I went out to train with one eye, effectively. I got a patch on one eye, and I was halfway around doing my first lap of warm up, and Bluey Hampshire's sprinting over or jogging over, and Bluey said, "Rick, what?" And he was an older player. He said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Mate, I've got." He said, "Mate, you can't train." I said, "Mate, Royce has told me I've got to get out here." He's going, "Mate, you can't." I said, "Bluey, it'll be right." Anyway, so when you look at things like that, you know, Bluey Hampshire at the end of his career, young bloke comes over and says, "Mate, that sort of stuff happened all the time."
Wow.
And I reckon that would be the same at every club, because the teammates look out for other teammates. And I didn't last long that night. You know, we did this exercise from end to end, and I ran under the ball about 4 times because I couldn't judge where it was going to land. It was going over my head. Royce came over and some stage said, "For Christ's sake, get off the track, will you?" And so they asked me about my attitude towards Royce. That there's sort of there's a bit in there. But,
yes.
So Rick, you know, you wore the number 8, and that is, you know, you just talked about your toughness there. You're hard to get off the field even with one eye. But the number 8 was synonymous with you know, being rugged and tough, and you kind of laid that DNA. We talked about Dougie, about the power of Guernseys and, you know, what it means. And Doug, you know, just said the spirit of the number 7, you know, he's so passionate about that. Yeah. For you, the number 8, Guernsey, you know, there's been custodians that's passed on to, you know, other tough guys like Bernard Toohey and Mitch Hahn, Danny Southern have worn that. Yeah. You know, do you feel the importance of past players really passing on, you know, that baton of what it is to be Bulldog, you know, have that Bulldog spirit, you know, and does that help with club culture even today?
Well, it certainly did in our day, Matty. I know that, you know, you get around the old players, or the old players, past players, and they talk to you about when they played, and you know, Ian Morrison had number 8 before me.
Yes.
And then Ian retired, and I eventually got number 8, and you know, we bump into each other, and there's that. It's sort of like you've just got this automatic connection because I wore Van's number. You know, it's like you just connected. You might have hated each other, but you start wearing his number, it's like, mate, we're best mates. And it's just I'd imagine, well, certainly wasn't our day that, you know, you put the Bulldog jumper on and you speak to anyone else that put the Bulldog jumper on, there was that automatic connection. So I hope it's when people wear the number 8, they sit there and look on the locker, and it's got Ian Morrison and Rick Kennedy and Bernard Toohey and Danny Southern and Mitch Hahn. And I mean, I love Mitch. I thought Mitch and I were probably a little bit similar. He was much more skilled than me. He's a bit bigger than me, a bit more solid than me. But I think we played a similar game. And I hope that when he looked at the locker, he'd say, well, you know, all these guys have been before me. I've got a role to play here. So
that's right. Take a piece of Rick out there with me, and that's that's such an important thing. And I think that's what Bevo's trying to instill in this current group. You know, look where we've come from. We need to take a bit of Footscray with us, you know, out to every match.
Yeah,
I think that conversation, Rick. Also, the podcast episode was about Dougie's response to Lob getting his number 7, and at the end of it, we sort of talked about the fact that Lobby will know the responsibility, not only coming as a new player with certain amount of expectations, but if he dares put on that number 7, he must perform. He must perform.
Yeah. Well, you know, he's got big shoes to fill, and you know, I mean, there's been some great number 7s, hasn't there? And there is a responsibility, and in fact, the responsibility, Paul, is just pulling the jumper on.
Yeah.
You know, we just, you know, every player that pulls that jumper on's got a responsibility. And look, I can get a bit harsh when I do watch the game at different times, because I like people to run straight. I like people to go hard. So if they don't, or if I think they haven't, I'm probably not that respectful of that. But that's, you know, it's a different game today. But you know, you look at Hawk. Hawk. He was all of that. He could twist, he could turn, he could handball left, right, kick left, right. He could take a mark, he could take a specky, he could dive, he could throw a punch, he could handle himself at the best. The only kink in his armour was probably his next tackle will be his first. Did he ever tell you the story about when he had that heart murmur in hospital?
No.
Remember when his heart was missing? What is it? Misses a beat.
Right.
I called him up in hospital and I said, "How you going, mate?" He said, "Oh, mate, geez, I've been doing all these bloody tests. I've been here for 2 days. I'm doing a test every 5 minutes. You know, I've had about 100 tests." I said, "Oh, okay. So what are they testing?" He said, "Oh, they're doing all sorts of tests on my heart. And, you know, da da da." I said, "Oh, right." I said, "Well, that's good news." He said, "What do you mean?" I said, Did you say that they're testing your heart?" He said, "Yeah, they've been bloody, you know, da da." I said, "Well, isn't that good news?" He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, all these years we didn't think you had one. I've actually found one. Is it real?" And he said, "Oh, Kennedy, you so and so. You're the only bloke that would ring me in hospital and say that to me." Anyway, but it's but he's got a huge heart, Hawk, and he has it in life, and he had it when he played football, and I take the mickey out of him because it's probably the reverse. He's probably got a bigger heart than all of us.
Well,
probably fail that.
Even if it would stop beating, it probably was recharged with that bolt of lightning a couple of weeks ago, Rick. So don't worry about that. Now, Rick, we've taken up a lot of your time, so we want to end as we do with all our podcasts, and that is with a 60-second quiz, Rick. Now, we're putting this on you without any prior warning at all, so you can't back out of it. You faced up with Tony Lockett. You faced some of the big boys, so you can handle this. You're in the hot seat now. We're going to give you a teeny tiny bit of power, and that is you can choose which category. So here's 2 options for you. You can have first games in red, white, and blue, or you can choose Bulldog players who switched Guernsey numbers. All right, which category would you like, sir?
I don't think it matters, Matty, but let's go the ladder. Oh!
Right, the ladder it is. Okay, so it's Bulldogs who switched Guernsey numbers. All right, fantastic. You've got 60 seconds on the clock here. Here we go, 60 seconds on the clock. Bulldogs who switch Guernsey numbers. Your time starts now. Luke Darcy had 3 numbers ripped in one game, the jumper off his back in 2004, so he had to wear a supporter's jumper in the last quarter. Is that true or false?
False.
Correct. Rick Kennedy holds the club record for the most games in the number 54 before switching to the number 8. Is that true or false?
True.
It's true. Brad Johnson moved from the number 33 to Charlie Sutton's number 6 Guernsey. Is that true or false?
True.
True. Bob Murphy and which current Bulldog have changed from the number 22 to number 2? Which current Bulldog?
No idea. Pass.
Ugle Hagen, who wore the number 3 directly prior to Cody Waitman switching to it this year?
Chris Grant.
Mitch Wallace.
Mitch.
Before becoming the number 5, what number did Josh Dunkley wear in the 2016 Premiership game?
Pass.
It was number 20. Which former captain switched from number 42 to number 5?
Pass.
Matty Boyd. Chris Grant wore which number before changing to 29?
3.
Correct! Well done. That's right on the siren. We'll give you the last question actually here because it was right on it.
Nail it, Rick. Nail it.
You got to nail this one. Okay, here we go. The final question is, Tony Liberatore changed to number 39 from which number, which was the highest ever worn in club history?
60.
Correct!
That's unbelievable. I can't believe I knew that.
How did you get that?
I did remember that.
That's impressive. That's impressive. We're going to calculate the scores now, Rick, and they're coming up on your screen. Here it is, Rick. Oh, you've done incredibly well. Not quite at the top, but beautiful effort, particularly with that last one, which is a high point scorer. Well done, Ricky.
Thanks, Rick. Thanks, Maggie. Thanks, Paul. Been fun.
Rick, you had 11 wonderful seasons, and also post that when you were supporting the club on the board and as a chairman of selectors. How would you like to be remembered from the supporters' point of view?
I had a crack. I did my best. Gave and got out of the road.
Beautifully said, Rick. Everyone, on behalf of Inside the Kennel podcast, Rick, we'd love to say that was a magnificent interview. Thank you for your generous time. You're an amazing individual to the football club, and I'm sure a lot of people are going to enjoy this episode of Inside the Kennel podcast. Thank you, Rick Kennedy.
Rick Kennedy, one of 36 captains. There he is, ladies and gents. What a champion. Thanks, Ricky.
Red in my heart, white in my veins, blue in one eye, red, white, and blue in my brain. I'm